Hi everyone! Welcome to Finding Joy in the Mundane. My name is Aya Nichols and I am your host, and I'm really excited for you guys to be on here today because I'm excited about our topic. And I know that I say that every week, but I've decided to go a different route and start talking about a few things that have been on my heart and that I see are very prevalent in our world today. And because I work in the mental health field, so obviously it's in my world all the time. So I've realized that most of the mental health content that's out there is being created by professionals who have definitely studied mental health and have seen it in other people and have treated it. But there is very few people out there creating content from a mental health perspective of their own. So that is why I decided to start my new series on all mental health, all different aspects of mental health. So I'm just going to begin by asking, what is mental health? And it's a word that's thrown out there all the time. And usually it has a negative connotation, means that someone is struggling with their mental health. So it's definitely not something that most people want to talk about openly and are usually really self-conscious because they don't want people to think of them as weird or as crazy. So they just kind of keep their mouth shut and live their life. And I don't think that's right because so many people do struggle with mental health. And I don't think we fully, as a culture yet, fully understand what mental health is. And I say that because we view mental health as something completely separate from physical health, which I think is insane because mental health has everything to do with your brain, how you think, how you process, and that's part of your body. And it affects your body, how you process things, the chemicals in your brain, how that is elevated or not. It affects your body completely. Sometimes people with mental health have an increased likelihood of developing heart disorders, cancer. So to say that they're separate healths seems unrealistic. And, when we talk about physical health, there isn't a stigma around it. We always say that physical health is a thing that everyone needs to be aware of and take care of on a daily basis. Not something that we should put aside, not something that we should ignore, because we know if we ignore our physical health, we will end up really sick or really tired, and both. So we are really open about all the different ways we can improve our physical health. But we are not very open with including mental illness in that. And I believe everyone needs to take care of their mental health. That is just who we are on the inside. It's physical health, who you are on the outside. Mental health, who you are on the inside. And what comes out of it. And so that's why I believe everyone should be taking care of their mental health on a daily basis, making sure that you do self-care, making sure that you have boundaries, making sure that you are fulfilling the life that you want and chasing after it instead of just constantly putting yourself down, having others put you down, and just completely ignoring it as if it will just get better on its own. And there is this myth where if you just have good mental health, that means that you're set. You don't have any imbalances, you don't have any struggles, so you should have good mental health and that's it, and it will run itself. That's not true. Your mental health can change throughout your lifetime and does because you change and your circumstances change. So for us to sit here and say, okay, it's those people who struggle with their mental health, there's something wrong in their brain, is just speaking out of ignorance because they're putting themselves in as much danger as a person who denies their own mental health. So that is why I wanted to start this new series and just start speaking about the different topics that I've grown to learn and love. Because of my struggles with my own mental health and my mother's mental health, I became very obsessed with just learning about it in high school. And because of that, I went to Radford and got my bachelor's in psychology and worked in the mental health field ever since. So I've been working in the mental health field for over 10 years. And it's been something that I am very passionate about because I see how much not having that support affects people's lives. And on the other hand, how having a good support with your mental health can change everything. So I wanted to just bring more clarity from a person that both has experienced mental health, struggles with mental health, and has studied mental health. So thank you everyone for being on this journey with me and being willing to just hear me out. And first, I wanted to begin by stating how many people actually struggle with mental health and what that looks like. According to the National Institute of Mental Health, 25% of adults and 13% of children are diagnosed with a mental disorder every year. Put together, that is almost 40% of our population being diagnosed with a mental disorder every year. And when you put it that way, it's almost 50-50 whether you're going to be struggling. At that point, with those odds, then most of the people you're around, odds are they will have some sort of mental disorder, whether that be depression, which includes about 9% of that. Bipolar is 3%. PTSD is 4%. ADHD, my people, 9%. Schizophrenia is less than 1%. And that is one of the more extreme disorders. But all of these disorders have their own consequences, have their own struggle. And people will need to be able to live a life while still trying to manage their own disorder. Just like how when a person is diagnosed with diabetes, they will have to watch their sugar for the rest of their life. Did they sign up for it? No. Did they cause it for themselves? Did they choose it for themselves to get attention? No one would say that. But a lot of people consider people who have been diagnosed with a disorder saying that they just want attention. They just want more sympathy from others. And that's not the case. It just means that there's something in their body that needs attention. And that something just happens to be their mind instead of their blood sugar. And I think the more we are able to talk about it in that way, the more we're able to see that people who have mental disorders are just people who have struggles. Everyone has a struggle, whether it's mental or physical. But it's how we approach those struggles and how we see ourselves through it is what truly makes or breaks the person. Because if we were to fully embrace the fact that we're all broken and we all need things to be working on a daily basis, whether that be self-care or anger issues or walking or journaling, it just normalizes that person and we realize we're not that much different than each other. Even though society wants us to be all that different because it feeds off of it. So there are two different things that really coincide with mental health that affect it. And that is, there are genetic factors and there are environmental factors. It's the genetic factor. Your genes, your parents, your grandparents, your brothers and sisters, your crazy aunt that lives God knows where. All of that has to do with you because you guys are all made of the same genetic makeup and have similar ways of your body operating. Not to say that it's exact, but it is similar, so at least we should pay attention to that. And then there are the environmental factors. The environmental factors have much more say than I think than genetic because the environment can change our genetics. And that's why it's scary. Because even if you were to have a genetic disposition, if you have the right environment and are being cared for and you're caring for yourself, you may never even struggle with it. But if you are a normal person, there's no history in your family, and you have these traumas that happen in your life, then all of a sudden you have changes within your brain, you have changes within your body and your DNA. And now you have the potential of passing that on to your children. So for us to really not take a look at what's affecting us, I think is just really irresponsible. But for the people who are, all the power to you. And thank you for watching. So I wanted to also talk about a little bit about chemical imbalances and the different myths and stigma that comes around with it. Because the minute you start talking about, oh, they have a chemical imbalance, it's as if that can't happen to you. As if that's just something you are born with. And honestly, chemical imbalance is such a fragile thing. It is just your body becoming out of whack. Imagine how easy it is for our sleep pattern to become out of whack. Of course, it's that easy for our brains to become out of whack if we're not watching. Imagine if you are a healthy person that's born into a healthy family, and then all of a sudden you experience something that is high stress. Let's say like going to war, or getting through a divorce, or foster care, any of that. And because it's a long-term stress, it's not like you experience it for one day. It's like a stress you experience for months on end. That means that your body's producing cortisol every single day at such a high level. And because of that, your body, like your mind, will want to make up for it. So it's going to change some of the other things to help mediate that and try to rebalance itself out. And then what if all of a sudden you're no longer in this high stressful situation and now it drops? Now you're sitting here with very low other chemicals that should have been balancing this whole part. And that is why they need medication in order to help rebalance that. And some people only need medication for a few months, a few years, or for the rest of their life, because the damage we don't know until we're in that situation where we are seeking treatment. And that is what I wanted to explain as far as chemical imbalances in people and how that affects us. Because those chemical imbalances not only affects just chemistry, it affects us personally. It affects the way we process our emotions. It affects the way we process memories and make new memories. So every part of us, one of our biggest parts is our emotions and making memories, becoming and growing. So of course, if those are imbalanced, a person's going to struggle. They're going to struggle with having an accurate version of their reality and making memories off of that. Like everything that you are making from that point is going to be a little bit disordered. It's like all of a sudden you have these colored glasses and that you have to see the whole world and live in it. Just as that, with these colored glasses that shape everything, the way you process it, the way you feel it, the way you see it. So even though that might not be actual reality, that is the way you're experiencing it. And that's the way you're processing it. And that's the way your emotions are based off of. And that's why it's so hard, because people say, well, you're not actually in reality. You just need to see what's in front of you. Why can't you actually just get better? Why can't you just get out of bed? Like any other person can get out of bed. But not every other person has all of these memories and all these emotions hovering and weighing them down to the point where they don't even want to get up. So having more compassion with each other in that is so crucial, because you would never question someone laying in bed all day if they have 102 fever, because we know our bodies are uncomfortable and that we are feeling overwhelmed and are achy and all of it. But when someone is struggling with depression, a lot of people don't understand why they can't get out of bed. And it's the same. Instead of it being external, it's just internal. It's an internal fever. So with that, that's why I wanted to say that sometimes medication is necessary. So if it's permanent, that's okay. And that is why I also wanted to be able to share some of my personal experiences to help kind of offset the medical terms and all of those things, because that is where I feel like professionals stop. That's the basic understanding that they have. What it's like living with mental illness and living around mental illness is very different than textbook, because it's very personalized. One person can struggle with bipolar and another can struggle with depression. You will not have the same kind of struggles, even though you may have the same kind of symptoms. But the issue is different. Or, like me, you were raised by a schizophrenic mother. And those issues were a lot different than being raised by a mother that struggles with anxiety. And having an understanding of those differences, I think, may really help us kind of take more of the stigma out and just be able to meet each other's needs in a different way. So growing up with a schizophrenic mother is not easy. And what's interesting is the fact that there wasn't schizophrenia in my family, so it wasn't necessarily genetic. My mother developed schizophrenia because of the war that was going on in Lebanon at that time. And there were constant bobbings, there was constant high stress, she was constantly anxious and paranoid that something was out to get her, because they were. Until there was a peace treaty that was signed in the late 1900s, right before I was born. And all of a sudden, there wasn't people after you, and they weren't coming to take your house or anything like that. But she still felt like it. Her body had gotten used to that kind of stress and that kind of high pressure situation, to where when it wasn't there anymore, she didn't know how to regulate herself. And in Lebanon, mental health is viewed as something that Americans had came up with just to sell pills. So they basically just ignored her and called her eccentric and was like, that's just who she is. And because of that, she got married, then remarried, and then had us, me, my sisters, and my brother, and then was able to wake us up in the middle of the night and take us to England and then take us to the US, and then for us to be homeless and then back into a motel and then homeless again. It was very unstable. But I think the worst part of it was the disconnect from her in the present. She was never present. She was always in her head worrying about who's after her. And because of that, I never really got to develop this mother attachment. It was never safe. So I developed that attachment with my dad, and he was my safe person. But growing up, she would be very erotic in how she behaved and how she spoke to us and how she felt. Like one day she would be okay. The next day she's screaming and tearing down bookshelves and wanting to leave the country. Sometimes she would just be sitting on the couch and the TV's off and she sits there and she laughs. Then she starts crying. Then she starts yelling and then she starts laughing again. All within about a minute. Sometimes we would wake up to her throwing things out the window in the middle of the night. I never understood that. She would throw toilet paper out the window. She threw the Quran once out the window. Just random things. And eventually I was just like, that's just who she is. I didn't know about mental health at that point. I was like 12. All I knew is that's who she was. And honestly, I hated her for it. I didn't understand it. I didn't know what she was going through. All I knew is that she couldn't take care of us and that it was selfish. I think that's the hardest part about having a mental disorder and living with one is to the other person, it could look very selfish because they are very much focused on themselves, what is going on in their heads, what is going on in their hearts. So I do understand that aspect of it. But now that I've grown older and now have learned so many of these different things, I have compassion for her. I don't hold her to the standard that I hold everybody else because I know that she has a struggle that I will never know of and that I was terrified of. I was terrified and was seeing a psychiatrist since I was 12 because I was terrified of having schizophrenia. And I didn't let go until I was 25 because I knew that the onset is usually around 17, 18, and you can have a later onset, you can have an earlier onset. All I knew is it could have happened to me. So I made sure I knew my reality. Even though I didn't develop schizophrenia, I developed my own mental disorders. And that was because of the trauma that came with living with a schizophrenic mother who would be gone for days on end and would have to take care of my sisters. She wasn't present there anyway. So it really didn't matter if she was present in the house or gone for a few weeks because either way, I had to make dinner, and either way, I had to make sure we went to school. So those kind of levels of trauma have given me my own mental disorder because I lived in the high stress. I lived in the paranoia, just like how she did. And that gave me anxiety. That gave me depression. That gave me all these different ways of seeing life that I no longer wanted to live in it. I didn't want to live in this world because it was too scary of a world. And every new memory, no matter what it was, just reinforced that scary part of me. And that's why it's so hard when we just say, well, why don't you just change things? Even if they were to change things, they would still experience it in this broken way that isn't necessarily all that healing. Even though I was hospitalized and put in different institutions starting from 15 to 26, it wasn't until I finally took charge of my own mental health and developed my own team of providers that I finally understood and had power over my own mental health. Because otherwise, it was on the whim and knowledge of other people who, yes, they had that textbook degree, but they had no understanding of the different aspects. And mental health develops, just like your physical health. And as you age, it differs. And the things that you stress about and struggle about differs. And sometimes you can have really good quality mental health, and then all of a sudden something happens and then it drops and you need extra support. But we are too scared to get that extra support because if we do, that means that we have to admit that we are struggling. And we don't want to be known and tell our family that we're struggling again. And that's something I really struggled with was after each stint of treatment, after each time I tried to have a stable life, I would be able to do it for a short period of time. And then moving forward, something would happen and I would just break and I would just be on ground zero again, having to go back into the mental institutions. And people didn't understand why that kept happening. And it was because I never truly dealt and found the right combination of things that would help me just stay steady. So finding that right combination of treatment, medication, therapy, support could mean everything to a person struggling with their mental health. Because it really could mean the difference between them having a life that's filled with family, love, and support versus being homeless on the street. You know that 67% of homeless people struggle with mental health and don't have support. That is the reason. I work with women on a weekly basis who struggle with their mental health, whether it's because they had an aneurysm or because they were born with bipolar. Either way, they're on the street. No one will take them. Their family abandoned them because they were too much. So what are they going to do? They're at the mercy of the government's programs. They're at the mercy of other people. And I don't think that's right. And I'm not saying that we can change that overnight, but at least having that kind of awareness when you're passing someone on the street. And I think there's this stigma of most people are homeless because they've chose it. They decided drugs. They decided to just throw away their life. And in reality, they probably just don't know how to live a normal life, how to regulate their emotions, how to communicate them, how to handle waking up every day with that much weight on your heart. That is the struggle. So the next time you see someone struggling with their mental health, please have more compassion. And please just ask them if there's anything you can do to help them get through the day. You might not necessarily be able to help them overcome it. There's nothing to necessarily overcome. It's just the way their body is designed. Sometimes you can overcome it, but most times it's just the way your mind works, and you have to learn how to manage it. And people who have that honestly just need to know that they're loved anyway. That despite them having their outbursts like I did, despite having meltdowns and running away, they're still people worthy of love and care. And you may not be able to provide that all the time. You may not be able to provide that even when they're asking. But at the very least, being able to give them the compassion and understanding that they are just struggling. And if it's beyond your ability to help, then tell them that. Be honest with them. And maybe help them find another person that could. Whatever you do, don't just leave them alone in the dark, because they will end up on the street. Without any help, they will. So I do everything that I can every day, every week, in order to help support people who are struggling with their mental health, who are struggling to get back their life. And just to find that way of just living to where it's good and satisfying to them. It may not look the best life in the world, but to them, going to the grocery store is good enough. And that's good enough for me too. So if that's all it takes is me helping someone be able to get used to going to the grocery store, then I'm gonna do it. Next week, we're gonna be talking about trauma, and we're gonna be going through in depth in the next 3 episodes about what trauma looks like, how it affects you physically, emotionally, and how it affects the people around you. So please stay tuned, and I will see you next week. Bye.